Hello there. From our office in the City of London, I'm Kyle Hannon, and thank you so much for downloading this episode of the Go Beyond Disruption podcast. It's brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants, the unified voice of the AICPA and CIMA. If you're a regular listener, hello again, and if you're a new listener, welcome. What took you so long? We've been doing this for more than 100 episodes, so do hit the subscribe button on your podcast app or the follow button if you're listening on Spotify or another music app. That way you'll get our new episodes on your smartphone, your tablet, your computer as soon as they come out, totally free. You can also click through to our archive and find out more about us at gobeyonddisruption.com. Every week here on the podcast, you'll get insights from inside the accounting and finance profession that help you stay ahead of the curve, whatever business you're in. So you don't have to be an accountant. But it has to be said that whatever business you are in, there is no business that hasn't been affected by the coronavirus. It's a pandemic that we're continuing to explore in this show. I recently hosted a series of live video webcast Q&As, some streamed direct to Facebook, each with a panel of accounting and finance experts from a different part of the world. If you missed them when they went out live a couple of weeks ago, don't worry, here's a chance to hear the audio version of one of those programs. In this recording from a video session which originally streamed live on the 23rd of March, we share a UK and EU perspective. I was joined by a trio of finance professionals from across the region: Simon McAllister from the Republic of Ireland, Sarah Ghosh from the UK, and Wojtek Wieronski from Poland. We took questions via email and also during the live chat as we discussed how to manage the local impact of a global disruption. Live questions, live answers, regional perspectives from around the world on how coronavirus and COVID-19 is impacting businesses, caught up in a situation that all of us were not expecting. And for most people who had been putting together business continuity plans at the end of last year, this was not on the radar. But it's here now, and that's why we are doing our best to share perspectives rather than advice. Insights too. And that's why we're joined by three people from Ireland, England, and the European Union to talk about how people are accounting and managing locally for something that is affecting us all globally. You'll hear regional perspectives on how it's affecting people, whether they're at the office or whether they're trying to run an office from home. And we're joined by Finance Director, Digital Transformation Expert and Board Advisor, England-based Sarah Ghosh. Simon McAllister is with us too. He's a corporate finance professional in Ireland. And Wojtek Wieronski, a member of CIMA's Europe Council. He joins us from Poland, and he'll be focusing on a European perspective. Let's find out who's going to be doing that. And I think we'll start with my colleague, Anastasia Stefanidou, who is joining us from a different part of her remote control network. She has the power at her fingertips. She's at home and she is monitoring the Facebook page. Anastasia, tell us a little bit about what you do for CIMA.
Hello, everyone. So, yes, my name is Anastasia. I'm working from the brand and content and channels team. So I will be making sure that this live goes smoothly, and I will be monitoring any kind of questions you have and passing them to our panelists here. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anastasia. Next, we're joined from England, Sarah Ghosh, who is joining us from, well, where are you, Sarah? Tell us a bit about yourself and what you do.
Morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm actually in obviously at home in Surrey. So I have recently been working with a healthcare company as a finance director. So obviously the healthcare space is very much in the news at the moment. So looking at how we can support from that side from a finance perspective. I'm also on the association board and the CIMA Council as well. So wanting to make sure that our members and students are very much supported in this very challenging time.
Thank you, Sarah. Simon McAllister is in Ireland.
Yes, hi, everyone. As Kyle said, I'm a corporate finance partner based in EY in Dublin. Lead a team that works across the island of Ireland. We would normally all be in our various offices, three that my team are based in, working with a variety of different clients. And obviously things have changed quite dramatically over the last week and a half.
Indeed. And from a little further afield, Wojtek Wieronski, who is a member of SEMA's Europe Council. Welcome, Wojtek. Tell us a little bit about you and the work you do.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Wojtek. I'm currently working with a pharmaceutical company in Poland. And as you can imagine, we are one of the frontline services for all the people around the country, helping them to go through this pandemic. At the minute, I am currently in my office, actually, working together with my colleagues to ensure that all our actions, which we need to run in the business, are in line with our expectations.
And one of the interesting things was when 3 weeks ago we were originally talking about these webinars, is that we thought, well, we would be doing exactly what Wojtek is doing. We would be in our offices, but what we intended to do was set up a simulated Zoom call using Zoom instead of our normal video conferencing software. And we would put on a webinar which basically tried to recreate the scenario. Let's imagine we're all working remotely using a free tool like Zoom and trying to do business without being at the place of business. As so often happens, reality moves much faster than theory, and now we're doing this for real, which shows the importance of having a plan. Let's start off with plans. It's all very well to talk about the disruption. It's all very well to focus on what's had to change. But what about what we've been able to continually and successfully deliver as our world changes around us? What have we been able to keep doing? Sarah Ghosh, from your perspective, what has continued? What's been absolutely as clockwork? What have you been doing? What have your clients been able to continue getting from you?
I think obviously from a healthcare perspective, it's being able to deliver quality care. Obviously, there's more challenges with that in terms of managing workforce, but ultimately across the whole of the NHS, it's about making sure that the patient is at the centre of everything we do, and that hasn't changed in terms of the outcomes that we're wanting to deliver.
Simon McAllister, what's continued for you?
I would say an awful lot of our business has continued. I mean, as a large professional services business, we have a very diversified business in terms of the kinds of activities we're working with clients on. We have a lot of projects that are, effectively regulatory or statutory driven. So obviously our audit and assurance business has to continue, albeit they're doing it in some cases under some very difficult conditions in terms of being on site, not being on site, conditions that now prevail at people's balance sheet dates compared to what they would have been 3 months ago. We do an awful lot of work in the government and public sector. The vast majority of those projects are continuing as they were. We do a lot of transformation projects with clients. Existing projects that were underway, as this crisis has unfolded, are continuing. We'll talk maybe about some of the ones that are not continuing. And we have existing procurement processes that we might be involved with in clients or for new projects where they are continuing to run those processes and try and keep those moving as best they can so that they're in a position to appoint or to start work as soon as they can.
And Wojtek, from your perspective, you're in the office, so we know that you can at least still get into the building. What have you been able to keep on and keep your delivery, whether it's in terms of manufacture, whether it's being able to deliver services to clients? What have you been able to keep up with?
I think the biggest thing which we managed to keep up actually was serving our patients every day as they expected, because we as pharmaceutical business, we are in the front line. And obviously, clearly, when the whole COVID-19 issue emerged, there was a huge increase of demand. At the same time, there was, I would say, lots of constraints from the supply chain side. So our job was to ensure that we are still able to support our patients as they needed. And secondly, what was most important, we had to look after our employees, our colleagues, because naturally, as all of us, they have been concerned around their safety at work. So we need to ensure that we protect them as much as possible. So we had to quickly implement changes into our operating model and make sure that we can provide to them as much security as possible, physical, but also at the same time support them psychologically, because as all of us, they have been also concerned, and some of them needed some support, and we also ensure that we can provide them support.
Let's talk about how we're all responding to the situation. As we said, we didn't know that this would be happening when we put together last year's business continuity plans, but it's certainly happening now. So how have companies in our various sectors responded? Sarah, let's go back to you. How have you seen companies, perhaps ones you work closely with or ones more broadly in the sector, how have they responded so far?
Well, I think we have to be very clear that crisis management is now the new business as usual, at least in the short term. So it is about really considering looking at building another view of the world. The landscape has changed so dramatically from when the business planning was first done, say for the beginning of the year. We need to really be looking at how this is now changed and the assumptions we need to build behind that to make sure there's some form of business continuity.
Simon, how are things in Ireland? How's your company? Of course, it's a globally known brand, but how are companies that you're working with or ones in your sector responding?
It's very varied. Clearly there's a huge sectoral impact here, ranging from those who are seeing, a minor level of disruption to which they obviously have to adapt, all the way to the other end. And the obvious ones jump out, people like airlines, airports, any transport business, leisure, hospitality clients. They're seeing a very, very immediate fall off in demand. They're seeing very, very significant pressures on cash flow and on working capital. So it will vary by sector. Even those, I think, though, at the other end of the spectrum, the ones who you might say are seeing less of an impact, they're still trying to just work through what's the impact going to be this week, next week, in a month's time, whether that's in terms of business continuity plans or maybe longer term and things like supply chains. They may not have seen an impact yet, but those supply chains now are starting to gum up a little bit, particularly if they're trading within Europe. There's now queues at borders. We've seen big queues in Germany. And back in China, we're seeing reports that the country is starting to reopen, but yet the ports are still a bit slow because they've introduced new controls there. So even though things are starting to come back to normal in some parts of the world, the speed at which that normality returns is not probably what we would normally expect it to be.
Well, we're getting questions already where people are asking how they can balance having to focus on what they need to be doing today with what they know they're going to need to be doing in a month's time or in 3 months' time, in Q2 or in Q3, even though no one has clear visibility or a precedent to follow to build that assumptions and that continuity plan on. How do you build a strategy if you don't know where the goalposts are? Everything is very fluid at the moment. Wojtek, you work very closely with many of the sectors that Simon's just been referencing. How are things where you are?
I think, from my perspective, the whole situation is a kind of big test for all of us in terms of the way how we can manage crisis. And, normally when you prepare those plans in the business without such a situation, of course, you always plan for the worst, but you never experience that. And really, when you face it, you realize how your plans are good and obviously what you can do better. And secondly, also what is really important is those times which we could experience pretty much every day is about the communication, how you communicate effectively with all your key stakeholders, firstly with all your employees, secondly with your suppliers, and thirdly with your patients or customers, whom you need to give a lot of confidence that you are controlling your business, you are controlling what's happening there as much as possible, of course, and also you do take care as much as possible to protect your employees, your colleagues, but also to keep the business going, because everybody in my sector relies on us, and relies on us to continue operating despite all the disruption which happened outside.
In a situation like this, one of the things we all look for is guidance and direction. And we did have a question about what the AICPA or CIMA is doing to respond to the situation. And we just wanted to mention if our viewers, especially here in the Chartered Institute of Management Accounting community, are looking for pandemic-related information or guidance from the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants, we've now created dedicated online coronavirus resource centers as well. So coronavirus-related news, updates, etc., as well as a couple of toolkits. You can go to either cemaglobal.com/coronavirus. That's cemaglobal.com/coronavirus. You can also go to arcpa.org/coronavirus. So we've been talking about how we respond, what's continued, what impacts we've seen. But what about the impacts we've seen that we weren't expecting? Let me go over to Ireland again. Simon McAllister, what impacts of this coronavirus pandemic was the most unexpected?
The most unexpected, I think, was maybe the degree to which there was a lot of, again, variation between the way companies responded. Some responded quite preemptively. They effectively jumped ahead of some of the government guidance because they just felt, and the WHO have said this, acting fast is probably better than acting perfectly. And whether that's in terms of instructing people to work from home, quarantining certain teams, very aggressively if people are just, even have a little bit of a sniffle. We've seen clients who created A teams and B teams, and that they were rotating those in and out of the office before the instructions, came for sort of a more national work from home approach. But then you had others who I think were very, very slow to respond, and hopefully that won't, sort of impact their businesses or their people too negatively. But I think it was quite stark in terms of how wide a gap there was between those who reacted very quickly and very definitively and those who were a bit slower.
And Sarah, with your perspective, what just came out of nowhere in terms of impact or consequences from this pandemic situation we're all in? What surprised you when it comes to unexpected impacts?
I think it's really the speed at which things have happened. I mean, just based on the past week, the amount of legislative changes that have come through that businesses need to start understanding more about in terms of helping with liquidity, how the government measures that have been in place, how can you tap into those? And it's also about how we can manage the workforce and how we can ensure that they are supported, communicated, and actually working from home is obviously very isolating in some instances. So we need to make sure that there's still that social aspect as well. One thing that has come out of that is the innovative side of companies. So, for example, TechForce 19 has just been launched by the NHS around looking at putting together funds for companies to think about how we can address social care with people that are in isolation, and also the mindfulness of that aspect of being alone. So there's lots of other things that are coming out of this that actually will speed up the process of actually moving us forward from a technology point of view as well.
And Wojtek, I know these are things that not everyone has planned for. I don't know that there are many business continuity plans put together last year that took this kind of situation into account. But from your perspective, what surprised you about the impact of this coronavirus pandemic from the European perspective? How have things landed there?
I think that the thing which not surprised us a little bit over how quickly the things start changing in the country and the whole region from the moment when the first cases of COVID has been, I would say, clear in the media. And as I said before, the demand grew rapidly, but the growth of the demand was much above our expectations, and also demand not only for the products which were directly related to COVID, but also products which were related to any other things which you would never imagine. Because suddenly all our patients, our customers were concerned that in a second there will be lack of supply in the market. But also what's surprising in a positive way was how quickly things sort of came back to normal from this perspective. Since the first news about COVID in Poland were like 2 weeks ago, already now we can see a lot of uncertainty, but also a lot of, I would say, quietness in the market. People got used to new situations. The businesses, especially McAllister, adopted very quickly how to operate in a very constrained environment. And then we can see already it's turning to very, very positive, much more organized way of dealing with the situation, which gives me a lot of hope, a lot of, I would say, positive thinking about the future, that by complying to those limitations and dealing with them for some time, we can manage to go over it very, very quickly.
And I think that's important. We'll certainly touch on this a little later when it comes to rediscovering our sense of personal and professional resilience. But it has to be said that when it comes down to the nuts and bolts of everything, without technology which did not exist 20 years ago, our response would have been very, very different. And we have a question here which talks a bit about how we plan for things. We have a business continuity plan, which we updated in late 2019. It was not set up for a pandemic, more for a weather or a civil unrest, perhaps a terrorist-related event, something I think they describe as an emergency on-site category event. Wojtek, as we're talking to you now, what do you think someone in that situation should do? What are the first things they need to add to 2019's business continuity plan to make it relevant for 2020?
I think firstly, the business needs to review what circumstances the business faces which have not been considered as such in the continuity plan. Because, although you try to predict any possible scenarios, but you can't predict everything. So it's question number one. Secondly, also, you need to turn into the crisis management mode, which means that pretty much every day as a management team, which I am a part of, you need to get together every early morning to understand what has changed, what you're facing what you managed to deal with already, and how do you need to adapt to the very fast changing situation. And the plan which you had, the kind of crisis management plan, needs being updated pretty much on ongoing basis until you can say to yourself that pretty much all the key aspects of it are already pretty much under as much control as possible. So my view would be open, be agile, but also be very flexible in terms of how you react and how quickly you can react to the fast changing circumstances.
Let's get the perspective from Ireland. Simon McAllister, we're talking about what needs to be added to a 2020 business plan that makes it fit for the new future we're facing. Perhaps we've got something that was put together last year. What do you, when you see business plans that perhaps people in your sector, organizations or clients normally identify the known unknowns, now we've got unknown unknowns. What else do we need to be adding to our business continuity plans right now?
I would say it's the ability to try and plan and manage and assess lots of different outcomes, because the one thing we know for sure is that there isn't going to be one single outcome to this, and we certainly can't predict with any certainty how long are we going to be working from home, what are infection rates going to be like in our country, in our region, in our company, in our team. So and when we build business models and financial models for people, people sometimes ask us for facility to do sensitivities, and my response to that is always, we don't do sensitivities anymore, because the world doesn't change based on one assumption. The world changes based on lots of different assumptions changing, and when one assumption changes, it'll change something else over here. So we don't talk about sensitivities, we talk about scenarios. And I think companies now need to have an ability, and as Wojtek said, this is now a daily planning process, a live planning process, where you are running different scenarios for different outcomes and then revisiting them potentially every day or every week, whatever is right for your business in terms of cadence, to try and assess what are the different range of outcomes here that we could be landing on. We may not have a specific one, but if we have some different versions of different outcomes, that can give us a sense of the different things we may need to start to do, which might be in terms of workforce planning, it might be in terms of supply chain contingency or backlog ordering, it could be in terms of workforce the continuity around physical premises. What do we do with those? Across all of the areas of business needs to be working across.
And I think that when you deal with planning from a Q1, Q2, Q3 basis from the perspective of a finance professional, an accountant, suddenly we have to look at tomorrow, perhaps this afternoon. Things have changed. Things have become much more urgent, more mission critical. Just in case our viewers might have just joined us at the facebook.com/CIMA Global page. This is the live stream from the AICPA and CIMA. It's a live video webcast. We are talking about the coronavirus and COVID-19. It's a live Q&A. If you have just joined us, welcome. We're talking about how do we manage for the local impact of a global disruption. We're taking live questions, which you can put into the comment section on the Facebook page, and we'll do our best to give you live responses, giving you a regional perspective on how the coronavirus is impacting business around the world. This started at 12 midday UK time. There will be a US webinar, which we will be delivering later this week. That will be on Thursday. And then we have one focused on the Far East in a week's time on Monday, 30th. For now, we will be running the stream until about 1 o'clock UK time, and you can follow this on facebook.com/CIMA Global. I'm joined by three experts giving us a regional perspective from three different parts of our part of the world. Sarah Ghosh is a finance director. She joins us from England. Simon McAllister is a corporate finance professional in Ireland. And Wojtek Wieronski is a member of CIMA's Europe Council. He is joining us from Poland. So we're talking about the nuts and the bolts. And one of the realities is I have a slightly scratchy throat, but I trust it's just a lack of coffee. It's a small problem compared to what most people in business are facing. They're discovering all sorts of unexpected issues. And one of the things, and I'm going to put this to Sarah, that perhaps we've had to do is replace face-to-face meetings with virtual meetings. Sarah, perhaps a couple of weeks ago, you were going to be having business continuity planning discussions, business strategy meetings. You were going to visit people in their boardrooms or have one-to-one sessions with members of the C-suite, senior leadership teams. Now it's all got to be virtual. People will be posting their, and I mean this emailing, people will be emailing their requests, their business continuity plans for assessment. So when people talk to you about what might be missing from today's business planning strategies, from today's approaches to crisis, what would you be telling people who are emailing their requests for help to you? What would you be telling them? What do they need to be doing now?
In terms of the business planning piece, I would say it's really about the people in terms of the impact of coronavirus. So to be able to look at how you can plan for that in the future as well. So in terms of making sure that the business critical roles are covered, we've got backups for those people, the business can continue with a skeleton, a number of people in the office, people working from home. I think that what this is demonstrating is that it is possible to have interactions and meetings, etc., using technology, and it can be and is a very effective way for communication. And actually, once this is all over, I think the mindset will change to enable people to do more of this. But there's also still that need for the social interaction, the meetings face to face, and those ad hoc conversations at the water cooler. So the landscape will change quite dramatically after this. But I think it's for the positive in terms of engagement and making sure that we can have that work-life balance going forward.
Well, this question actually ties directly in with what you've just mentioned. A question about sole traders and sole proprietors. What can we do when it's just me and a tiny team of contractors? Should I try to tie in with other sole practitioners or sole traders? Now, I think that goes directly to your point when you're talking about the social interaction. Technology is crucial. We could not do what we're doing without technology. We could not be continuing our businesses without technology, but we're doing business with people. So talk to us a little about that personal connection. Expand on the way that we could continue to engage with stakeholders, perhaps customers, staff, suppliers, partners. How do we keep doing that?
I think the communication around something like this is very important. So it's making sure that the suppliers are up to date in terms of what your approach is, making sure it's about collaboration across the whole of the supply chain and also with external stakeholders. And that's what we need to do more of in situations like this, because there's so many unknowns. We're all working in a very different, challenging environment, and actually collaboration is the key.
So before I ask the same question to Simon, I'm going to ask my colleague Anastasia, who is keeping an eye on any comments or questions we may be getting on the Facebook page of cimaglobal.com. I know we have been bringing some of those in that were sent in advance. Anastasia, is there anything that's coming in that we haven't yet touched on that you would like to ask us to look at the moment?
Yes. So we just actually had one question asking about advice for SMEs, small medium enterprises, and if there's some tips that you can share with people on what to look after from like smaller businesses.
Okay, and do we have any idea which country that particular query came from? Because if people are putting comments in, do mention where you are working from. Perhaps that's these days the wrong question to ask, because someone may be in Glasgow, but their office may be in London. Perhaps they're working from home in Glasgow. So tell us where your business would normally be done rather than where you're working from today. So let's perhaps go to Simon with that one. What's some advice for SMEs facing this kind of situation? What's the first thing they need to be doing?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think both for SMEs and for the sole trader question that Sarah was just on, but I would absolutely say that someone like that sole trader definitely should link in with other sole traders who they think are in a similar position. Competitor, not competitor, there is value in having conversations with, people who are in the same position and being able to describe what has worked well, what hasn't worked well. And the same for SMEs. I think they need to be trying to build a bit of a network amongst themselves, but also then lean on external parties, like ourselves, for example, like your auditor. I've spoken to a number of clients last week who I just proactively called them. I wasn't able to give them definitive advice about something, but we had an initial conversation. Firstly, they valued the personal connection and the ability to, or the recognition that someone was thinking about them. They were able to bounce one or two things off me. Again, I wasn't definitive in terms of advice, but gave an opinion. They were sense checking something. In a couple of cases, it accorded with what they were thinking. Maybe it wasn't. And you're using all these different touch points. Speak to your bankers. Both for your working capital requirements, but also just to get these views. What are they seeing? So certain parts of the economy, like our banking system, like professional services firms, they are seeing a lot of what's happening in the wider economy, which people can try and use that knowledge to try and predict what's going to happen for my business. And then certainly from an international point of view, if you have a supplier in Italy, certainly do speak to them. Again, make that personal connection, show you're thinking about them, but also try and understand what has happened in their business that may be something you can learn from in their business. We've seen examples of different sectors in different parts of the world where they've been more impacted than others. And they are very good templates for how we know it's going to impact our sector once it comes to our particular part of the world.
Wojtek, I'm going to ask you how we keep in contact with the people, even though we're not actually able to spend as much time with them in the past that we were used to. But I just had a response from the person who asked us that question. They've told us where they are based. They said they are based in the UK. They're based in London. That was the question about SMEs. So perhaps I'd go back to our England-based panelist, Sarah Ghosh. And we were talking about what do people do when they're just them, perhaps a sole practitioner, a very small practice, a tiny team of contractors. How can they get help? What would be a good way to kind of tie in with other resources, other people in the same position?
I think it's really important to acknowledge that there are lots of other people just within the CIMA network as well that work at SMEs, and there's a whole network of people that can share their own experiences. I think one of the key challenges is around the payroll side, because there's so much new legislation coming through that your payroll administrator or person would need to really get a handle of. And of course, if they're having to self-isolate, then that's going to give you a real issue. So it's about collaborating with other small companies or people that you know that can help with that, because obviously that's something that you just can't allow to fall by the wayside. You have to stay on top of that. So I would again just recommend reaching out to the network through CIMA, through the people that are in your business network, and having those upfront conversations about sharing resource, sharing the how-tos, because that will then really help to build more knowledge as well.
Thank you very much. And we do have another question about how do we balance the interests of our workforce the possible realities that everyone in the business has to face, making sure that people still feel valued. And we'll touch on that in a few minutes' time. But I'd like to ask Wojtek, once we deal with supply chains, extended supply chains, you deal with logistics, you deal with technological solutions, you deal with platforms, you deal with automation. These are things that we're very used to discussing and dealing with at the association. When it comes to the people, how are you in perhaps your particular sector in pharmacy? It's pharmaceuticals or pharmacy supplies? Pharmaceuticals. So obviously, a lot of stuff has to be moved around. A lot of stuff has to be kept track of. But how are you keeping in touch with the people?
So firstly, of course, in terms of people who work with us on the front line, who are actually every day serving our patients, we naturally make sure that obviously they do understand from us, what's happening, what we actually making happen in the business to make their everyday work easier and safer for them. But also at the same time, they need to have a very quick way of responding back to us, whether it's virtually or through their direct managers. There is, I would say, constant online, communication both ways, just to ensure that both parts are heard and reactions and specific action done very, very quickly. So it's thing number one. In terms of people in the office who are supporting the operation, of course, making sure that obviously we do continue the supporting functions. We need to ensure that obviously all our colleagues having the right way of communicating, where technology plays a vital role. But also, I think from the perspective of the whole business, the leadership is very important, the communication with the leaders. We as leaders need to be available for our people, whether virtual or physically, depends obviously what we can do in those days. We need to be visible. We need to be always ready to respond to them, to support them, even sometimes psychologically or even with some specific matters, just to make sure that we are there for them. Because I think that coronavirus not only tests for us in terms of our processes, systems, and everything else, but also is a huge test for us of our leadership, how we are going to lead the business through this difficult time, because it's very easy to lead the business when all things goes in line with our thinking, but it's very difficult to go through the very rough waters. And that's where us as leaders needs to be on the front line with our people.
Communicate, be transparent, be honest, but also pay attention to what is happening around us, not in terms of the technological solutions, but in terms of what's happening in terms of legislation. And we know certainly here in the UK, and perhaps Sarah, you'd speak to this, we did have a question, if we have a self-employed workforce, how do we protect them? Another question, how do you balance the possible need to lay off employees during an event such as this? And I understand these are two things. One is a question about, we work with a team of self-employed people. The other one is talking about employees. So perhaps we could try to cover both of those in the same response. On the one hand, you've got a self-employed workforce. Perhaps you've got another company which is having to face the prospect of laying off employees, but also making sure that they feel valued. I mean, is that balancing act something that one can even hope to achieve? Or are there other solutions? Perhaps this is going back to the self-employed question for those people on to where here in the UK, there's been a lot of discussion about the fact that government, who has stepped in with help for people who are employed, have still to come up with a reasonably equivalent solution for people who are self-employed. So what may be the case today? Legislation or new laws or new support may come out in a couple of days. So, of course, we're not giving advice at the moment because it's a constantly changing situation. But Sarah, what can you say to people who are dealing with a lack of information, lack of clarity, but still business has to continue?
I mean, as I said earlier, every day things are changing. So I'm hoping that there is something else that is going to be said about to support the self-employed. There's lots of, as I say, new legislation come in. We need to understand that more in terms of paying existing employees. And I think it's about the relationship you have with the people who work with you. It's making sure that they feel supported, that they know you're doing everything you can to find out what support is available, both for the business, but also for them as well. It's about keeping those connections restrictions, because ultimately we want to get back to hopefully a place where we were before, and we will need those valuable employees in the business going forward. So it's about the relationship. It's about being open about where you are, what you can do to help. I mean, that's my one kind of a piece of advice that I would give. Keep those lines of communication open, and make sure that everybody is aware that, you know, you're doing whatever you can to help them in their situations as well.
So it's a balancing act. And by the way, we are talking about how we balance things. How do we manage the local impact of this global disruption? If you have just joined us on the Facebook page for our live stream, we began at 12 midday. We will be doing this until 1 o'clock UK time this afternoon. You can view the live stream at facebook.com/CIMA Global. Put your questions to a live panel. How do they suggest we manage for this global disruption? We're taking live questions, providing live responses, and trying to give you regional perspectives on how the coronavirus is impacting businesses around the world. This is the first of 3 live webinars we are doing. This is focusing on the UK and the EU. One focusing on the US will be on Thursday, and then we have one focusing on the Far East on Monday. I'm Kyle Hannon from the AICPA and CIMA office in the UK. And if you've just joined us, the people who've just joined me, when I say just, they've been here for 45 minutes, but we still feel like brand new friends. Sarah Ghosh, you've just heard from, a finance director in England, a corporate finance professional from Ireland, Simon McAllister, and a member of CIMA's Europe Council joining us from Poland, that is Wojtek Wieronski. So we're talking about how we balance the reality, the possible need to lay off employees during events such as this, but also make sure that people feel valued. Is that even possible? How do we do that? Simon, you must be seeing this day in and day out at the moment. From Ireland, what's the perspective there? How are people balancing harsh reality with the need to keep people valued and to make them realize that they are still valued despite what the situation might lead to?
Yeah, I mean, the kinds of things I would just add, I think, to what Sarah just said is that when we talk about communication, there's a few different things that I've been thinking about, over the last few weeks. One is that there are elements of your team and your business that you probably cannot over communicate with. And I'm thinking in particular of, much more junior members of staff, new joiners. I was meant to have a person joining my team today, which is a really bizarre experience for them and for us as well. And there is going to be different communication strategies for different parts of business, depending on seniority, depending on experience, depending on their outlook. So some parts of our team, this is going to be let's assume we're going to be in a recession, which I think is probably a safe bet. It'll only just be a question of the length of it. This could be their 3rd recession because they've been around long enough. Others, it's their 1st recession. They have no idea what that's going to mean. They have no idea what it'll mean for our business. One other point then is the degree to which, when we talk about laying off staff and having to make changes to the total headcount, there will be different parts of our businesses, again, and each business will be different. Different parts of that workforce will know that they are essential, and they will know that they are not going anywhere, but that they may have changes to their role or that they will have changes to their workload. There will be other parts of our teams who know that they are probably the ones that are most at risk, either because they're first in or because it's a part of the business that's more vulnerable, or that the demand is dropping faster there than in other parts of the business. And again, that means that our communication strategy with those people and those different cohorts of people will need to be tailored. And it might mean something more formal or informal. It might mean something more frequent or infrequent. It might mean something, that is by video conference or by audio or possibly even by physical on a very limited basis to the extent that that's practical under the current restrictions. So I think it's really about businesses just thinking about the different parts of the businesses and the different communication strategies and the different modes of communications that will work depending on those.
And what about the perspective from the Europe? Logistics, the supply chains, the tremendously interwoven network of relationships, of service level agreements, of logistics. What are you seeing, Wojtek? How are you balancing the new reality with the need to keep people feeling valued when things are becoming very different?
I think, first of all, as leaders, we need to, I would say, demonstrate our people. We see how valuable they are for us, and actually, here in those days, pricing more than criticizing is actually playing a vital role. We normally tend to be more challenging, more often criticizing towards our people, whereas actually in those days we need to actually reward them more, even by simple thank you in everyday job. Secondly, also we need to acknowledge their fears. Currently, they are feared about their physical safety and health, but soon they are going to be worried about their jobs, as we discussed before. Yes, obviously, kind of showing empathy, number one, but then secondly, responding appropriately to those fears and managing them on that day is very, very important. Yeah. And also, we talked about before about collaboration and networking. I think those days, in my view, plays a vital role because on one side, you have businesses which got severely impacted by the COVID. Actually, they got closed down even in many ways. But also, there are businesses which are currently struggling with people. Number one, because obviously they have such huge demand that they can cope with that. And secondly, also because of restrictions which we face in the world around no schooling, having kids home, etc. Lots of people are forced to take the time off, and hence obviously the other businesses who are actually currently facing a huge demand, they actually are looking for people, looking for somebody who can support them. So also maybe in this collaboration and collaborative approach, we can find a way how some people who are currently impacted negatively by the situation can actually join temporarily and support the businesses who are currently struggling in the opposite way. And that's where again, as I say, collaboration and working plays a very vital role, not only within the industry on the peer-to-peer basis, but also across the industries.
Okay, so if we then look at what we have to do in our industry as finance professionals, we've all been talking about technological options. There's hardware, there's software, there's automation, there's all types of things that we could perhaps try to throw at this situation in some way to replicate or substitute for physical face-to-face business processes. Technological options can only go so far. But sometimes when all the dust settles, we're going to have to be looking at what's down on paper. And I now have a question about the legal and the contractual aspect of it. If we suddenly find ourselves in the situation that Wojtek just mentioned, if a company suddenly is in a terrible situation of stress, if it feels under tremendous pressure, is there anything in a service level agreement or a contract, perhaps an insurance policy, that a company could look at which would help mitigate this kind of situation? Are they, in fact, going to be aware that perhaps in their SLA, their service level agreement, in their insurance contract, there may be a clause which can help? Perhaps there's something in there which gives them an additional option. Sarah, let's go back to you and get your take on that.
I mean, that's an interesting question. I think that definitely is a conversation to be had with your insurance companies and also with the people that you're actually contracted with. I mean, there is something called a force majeure that tends to be in contracts to cover these kinds of events, but it would need to be reviewed quite in detail to see actually is there anything that can be done in that area. I mean, that's all I can add really from a contractual point of view, given that there's a lot of detail behind it that would need to be investigated.
Simon, you would have been seeing this from the perspective of your clients at all levels. What would you suggest the SLA or insurance policy or contracts, even memorandums of understanding may offer in terms of additional support that people, because they've never thought about this kind of situation, may not actually have realized was even there in the first place?
Yeah, I'd probably make 3 points. I think one, starting with insurance, the reality we're seeing here and with a lot of our clients is that the insurance policies, as always, are set up to exclude, more than they are set to include. And a lot of them are having difficulty with claiming business interruption, depending on whether something is government mandated or voluntary, depending on whether the specific issue around pandemic is or not. So insurance is a really difficult issue, and it's probably going to continue to be difficult for clients. Second is probably just about splitting, when you talk about contracts and legal, splitting existing from future. Existing, Sarah's right when she talks about force majeure. That's the one we've seen people are starting to look at as their best hope if they're trying to avoid issues around specific performance or around service breaches. We're aware of one trade body in a part of Asia which has issued 1,500 force majeure certificates, and obviously this is a feature of that particular legal system, to their members, which has given them protection against their counterparties to avoid breaches of contract, which would have created exposure for those members of about $14 or $15 million. So huge amount of exposure, but that force majeure has been the means by which to give themselves a bit of breathing room. And then, undoubtedly it's down to having that conversation with the counterparties to see what can be done and what's realistic. And then the final point is on future contracts, and we've done this ourselves. For any new contracts people are entering, they need to be including language that specifically protects around the current issues. So, for example, we have a piece around working on client site, and we've now language in our letters that says if we will work with our client, but if we can't be on site, and if we think we shouldn't be on site, then we're not going to be on site. And if that impacts our service delivery, then that is what it is to a large extent. We need to be able to extract ourselves from some of those arrangements if we think the personal safety of our staff is going to be put at jeopardy, and we need to manage.
Right. So then we know it's no longer business as usual. So from an accounting perspective, let's talk about things that finance professionals could be doing now, which is not only different to what they may have had to focus on doing in the past, but which continues to bring reassurance and perspective to their clients and their business partners. And as we've covered, this is a situation that very few of us have ever faced. I have never studied accounting, but from my limited awareness of the time I have spent in business school, at no stage did I see in Emergency 101 any specific mention of global pandemics. No one can go to the office being mentioned as a possible contingency to plan for. But just because we haven't trained for it, it doesn't mean we can't cope with it. So my question to all of you, what are some of the perspectives or insights or perhaps accounting methods that finance professionals can still bring to their clients or their organizations as clients around us are suddenly fighting hundreds of fires every day that they weren't expecting? They'll be looking everywhere else but at their accounting situation, but at their books, because they've got so much other emergency stuff to cope with. So how do we as finance professionals bring that balance, that reassuring presence, so that they don't take their eyes off the ball as businesses, so that the numbers can still continue to have the right set of oversight on them? Wojtek, let's go to you on this one. What do we as accounting professionals still need to be doing today to continue to bring reassurance to our clients?
I think firstly we have to understand obviously what are the key priorities or things which our clients, our business are looking at. At the minute, I think for most businesses, the biggest challenge which they're facing in this situation is maintaining your liquidity and making sure that basically your business actually is still liable. So we as accountants can, I would say, help all the businesses and our organizations to navigate through these difficult times and also engage in those discussions. Our key stakeholders, particularly our business partners, because although there are some SLAs, for example, which we discussed before, which in a way constrain us as businesses, but at the same time, if we try to, in those days, execute those SLAs in some circumstances literally, they may actually kill both businesses. So I give you an example. If let's say you have some SLA about your rental agreement with some of your partner, you can temporarily agree based on facts, based on, I would say, numbers. Yeah, but actually it makes perfect sense to, let's say, reduce those expectations for a limited period of time until the situation settles, so that then both parties could win, rather than actually striking down to debate what SLA was and actually who is actually should do what. Yeah. So in my view, we should, I would say, tackle things like this and demonstrate very clearly, very transparently, in a simple way, most importantly, to our organizations, to our clients, how we should, I would say, react, how we should accommodate to ensure that we both can go through that in a winning way.
I'm going to continue this conversation with Sarah in a minute, but I would just encourage all of us to think, because this webinar finishes in about 5 minutes' time, to be able to give just maybe a selection of 3 key points, 3 key takeaways that you would suggest that people, start their lunchtime with. But Wojtek will be coming back to you to talk about those in a minute. Sarah, let's continue that conversation. What do finance professionals need to be doing now to keep that oversight, to be watching the bottom line when our clients are looking at so many other things? What do finance professionals need to be doing now to continue to bring that kind of reassuring perspective to things?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of our obligation is to safeguard the financial position of the business and ensure that it can continue in whatever form it takes. So for me, it's about the external relationships that we need to make sure are happening, and the conversations with HMRC, with our pensions companies, and also looking at how we can best tap into some of the help that's available from a financial perspective. So the cash piece is really important. So liquidity, and I say also speaking with our auditors, because actually a lot of companies' financial year ends is the 31st of March. So all of that timetable will not be happening as it normally would. So it's having those conversations to make sure that the timing is changed, that there's understanding of when that might happen, and there's still that control that the finance people can give to the business to say everything's still working the way it should, albeit on a different landscape, but we're still doing those things that we're obliged to do. And also just to tailor the reporting so it's at a very pointed level, not all of the management reports that are normally done, but just a very high level view of where the company's heading in the next couple of months.
And Simon, the issue of what can an accountant do when we can't actually see our clients doesn't mean we're taking our eye off their situation at all, does it?
No, exactly. I mean, I think the area I would point to for companies thinking about this is that the finance team are going to need to start to deal with a very broad variety of issues. They are going to be the team that are going to be asked by different parts of the business, what's this going to mean for cash flow? What's it going to mean for service delivery? What's it going to mean for a million different things? To do that, they're going to need to create capacity. They're going to need people who are ring-fenced and have the bandwidth to respond to these ad hoc requests. But that means you need to try and allocate the existing work to the team to continue to look after the day-to-day part of it. So bookkeeping, a minimum level of reporting. So, in every business, invariably, there's reports that are generated, which actually no one looks at. Let's take the chance to ditch some of those. Let's be very clear about what are the absolutely critical, business critical finance processes that have to continue. We run those, and everything else gives bandwidth to people to respond on an ad hoc basis. Scenario planning, resilience planning, liquidity management, all the key issues we've been talking about, because invariably a lot of the issues in the business, I mean, the people charged with dealing with most of these responses are the COO and the CFO. And the finance team, a lot of it will come back to them to support the analysis and support the decision making that needs to be done over the next few weeks.
So when there are emergencies coming up every hour, what the accounting team, what the finance professional can do is provide that support. They can keep their eye on the data and the figures, where the senior leadership team have to be looking elsewhere because the emergency nature of today's situation demands that they fight that fire. But as the accounting team, as the finance professionals, we can provide that ongoing, reassuring oversight the same way we always have, I would imagine. Now, we do have another question or two that has come through. Anastasia has one there, which I'm going to ask her to bring to us. And Anastasia has been monitoring the comment and the questions we've been getting on the Facebook pages. Some of those will already have been covered. If any of those are inviting us to give a response to a new topic, then we'll certainly try our best to feature that. We do have, I think we'll run a couple more minutes just to make sure we squeeze this in before we wrap up. Anastasia, what is the question you have there?
Yes, hi. So we have a couple of people asking about current audits. So there is a concern out there that people are going through audits at the moment, and some of them have have plans to go through audit like this or like next month. And people have been wondering that what do we think? And, will they be, will they be asked to provide any additional disclosure? And if yes, do we know if there's any extension to submit audited accounts? Because, with additional content being required, they might need more time.
Well, I saw Alistair's Simon hand go up. So let's let you take that, Simon McAllister from Ireland.
Yeah, so Sarah did point out, the very key thing around timing. Some companies will have a 31 March audit deadline, their year end will be 31 March. That's going to pose significant specific concerns around things like impairment, around things like going concern. But for those who have December year ends, they should still be thinking about how that changes their audit and their accounts process at the moment. So down to specific things like IAS 10, which is post-balance sheet events. What are the disclosures you're going to need to make? But really the substance of it, I think, will come back to a lot of companies around the rigor of a going concern review, because the balance sheet at a particular point will just be the balance sheet. And it will be, there will be the normal concerns around recoverability of debtors and about stock and everything else, depending on the business you're in. But that going concern review and your ability to survive over the next 12 months is going to be the key issue. And it's worth having proactive conversations with your auditors about that over the next few weeks, depending on the timing of your audit. We've seen an announcement this morning in the UK that there's going to be no earnings releases for public companies over the next 2 weeks. There will be a slowdown on auditing firms issuing audit opinions over the next 2 weeks, as well as that, because they would, for private businesses, as they all work through the consequences of what things like going concern and what post-balance sheet disclosures are going to be required.
What are 3 key takeaways that each of our panelists can leave us with that will help our viewers manage for the local impact of this global disruption? Let's go back to Sarah Ghosh, who is joining us from England. Sarah, 3 key takeaways. What would you suggest people begin their lunch with?
I think the first one for me is around protecting employees, making sure that the company is doing everything they can to support them if they're working from home, keeping into contact. The second is around cash and looking at externally what's available to help support. It's really important that what's being offered by the government is taken up by companies. And thirdly, it's about supporting the supply chain, making sure that you can continue by supporting people who are supporting you.
Wojtek.
Yeah, so I would firstly echo what Sarah said. So firstly, most importantly, look after your people in many ways. Look after them physically, look after them mentally as well, just to make sure that you are supporting them and you are there for them. Secondly, obviously manage cash, because it's a bloodstream of your business. If you lose liquidity, then it starts being a problem for you. And lastly, I think manage your priorities well, because we need to be clear. This situation brought a lot of chaos in organizations. And that's where you have to step in and make sure you help the company to bring the right priorities to the light and remove everything else which is just a distraction, because we have a lot of distractions from outside.
Yeah, there's no time for distractions at the moment. Simon McAllister from Ireland, what do you suggest people try their best to remember?
Yeah, so people will see the theme here. So as Wojtek said, and Sarah touched on, liquidity is key. Our restructuring colleagues used to say in the last recession, cash isn't king, cash is emperor. Cash is the absolute number one thing. Second thing is talk to your staff, engage with them. Do flex that depending on different people, different style, different cohorts. And the third thing is, as I mentioned about the WHO advice for government, same applies for businesses. Act quickly. Don't let perfect be the enemy of getting that decision done quickly. And a fourth one, as you mentioned, we're taking it into lunch. Wash your hands before your lunch.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much to my panelists, Sarah Ghosh, Finance Director, Digital Transformation Expert and Board Advisor based in England. From Ireland, Corporate Finance Professional Simon McAllister, and a member of SEMA's Europe Council joining us from Poland, Wojtek Wieronski. I'm also joined by my colleague Anastasia Stefanidou, who has been monitoring the live stream, which you have been watching at the Facebook page of CIMAglobal.com. That's facebook.com/CIMAglobal.com. You will see this archived live webcast posted there shortly. Thanks so much to everyone who was submitting questions. One last thing I would leave you for anyone looking for pandemic-related information and guidance from the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. You can find updates, resources, and more about the coronavirus outbreak. The coronavirus resource centers have been created online at the websites of aicpa.org/coronavirus and CIMAglobal.com/coronavirus. So for our UK audiences, CIMAglobal.com/coronavirus. I think we see it all comes down to the people. We stay engaged, we stay open, we stay communicative, because to be honest, we are all in the same situation. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And for our viewers at the Facebook page of CIMAglobal.com, from the AICPA and CIMA office here in the UK, I'm Kyle Hannan. Everybody, stay healthy. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Disruption, brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. Learn more about today's topic at aicpa-cima.com/disruption. This podcast is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered and does not represent an official opinion or position of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants or any of its subsidiaries or affiliates. It is provided with the understanding that the association, its affiliates, and subsidiaries are not engaged in rendering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The association, its subsidiaries, and affiliates make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to and assume no responsibility for the content or application of the material contained herein and expressly disclaim all liability for such damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material.